So before moving into my presentation, next, just disclosure. I think Maurice introducing myself already. I'd like to call out, I'm on behalf of IQVIA consulting a lot of companies, including, but not limited to Merck and Takeda. I call them out because these are two of my bigger clients, and I've been doing a lot of recent work. The second thing I'd like to call out here is that what I present here is not all academically peer-reviewed material. A lot of it is based on internal analysis. Some of it is available through what we call white papers, thought leadership pieces. And in that order, I'd like to also call out John Rick, Marcus Gorex, Stefan Lismeyer, and Peter Wagner, who are my deeply appreciated colleagues contributing to, say, some of the analysis here. Then finally, views are my views. So I think we'll talk about four main areas. First, I will set the scene a little bit about what's happening in the current field of neuroscience. And that's quite interesting because when I go back to my early years, and I think Maurice alluded to that already, I'm a child of the 80s with academic roots at that moment in time. I've seen some of my teachers coming by in the presentation by Ellen, were, for example, indeed Marianne Joëls, Ron de Kloet, who did a lot of corticosteroid work in Utrecht University. But then I moved on and have seen, say, the rise and the fall, and I think there's a second rise in neuroscience research. And I'd like to dwell a little bit on, say, what is causing that, and why I think this second wave of neuroscience is quite interesting and might hopefully lead to good therapeutic options in the near future here. In that light, I will talk a little bit about hurdles and talk about solutions, for example, on patient recruitment, trial execution. That's a topic where Maurice and I have worked for indeed the last 20 years, a lot of times when we were talking about drug development on finding the optimal patients, deep segmentation, census-based approaches, driving at the level of signs and symptoms instead of a diagnosed patient. And that helps you also understand, say, that was also the reason why I asked that question on, say, are some of the signs and symptoms prodromal to certain diseases or not? Helping healthcare systems improve early diagnosis. I think it is important. I think Julia already mentioned, say, some of the issues we see with polypharmacy, but recognizing a patient, finding an early patient is quite important. You know, you'd like to intervene before the damage has happened. And certainly when you talk about antidepressant therapy and major depressive disorders, the damage, we all know what it can be. And then finally, one of the challenges indeed is rewarding innovation and access. And again, I think a lot of issues are up and coming there. Perhaps some changes in Europe will help us getting more harmonized there. So when we talk about neuroscience, it's interesting. What we have done here, this is a plot which we peruse where we looked at one hand, say, the disability adjusted life years, which is an indication of, say, the importance and the impact of a disease on a person's life. And the other hand, say, the change in that. And what we also put in this plot is the size of it. And what immediately strikes you is that, say, the high level of disability of the depression. When I was seeing this plot for the first time, it struck me a bit. I was thinking that, you know, other areas like Alzheimer, which gets a lot of media attention, or even Parkinson's, which has a lot of media attention, is having probably more disability, just at life year impact. But actually, depression is one of the highest here. Next to another topic, anxiety. Migraine is also a very big one, which is interesting because when you see some of the later slides and actually looking at this lot, you would expect, you know, pharmaceutical companies very interested in the higher segments here. What you see is that, say, the investments in new products are not necessarily following those where, say, the biggest healthcare impact is. So what you see is that currently, and I have to say that, you know, the industry has been spending the last few years a lot of money on oncology here, but actually currently CNS represent the number 14, the number 2 therapeutic area in the pharmaceutical industry pipeline. So there's clearly a renewed interest in this space, and it goes up from the last decades here. A lot of investment in neurology. You will see here Alzheimer, you see Parkinson. Depression is only 5%, which is kind of strange if you contrast with the other one. And if you look at migraine, which is a very big burden of disease, where there's still a lot of medical need here, there's kind of poor investment in the relation here. The other thing, what is not on this slide, but is that what you see effectively happening is that in the trials, if you take the conversion of coming into a clinical trial phase 1 up to a product being launched has dropped significantly. I think about 10 years ago that was about 13%, which would make it to the market. Currently it's dropped to 5%. So yes, there is a lot of investment. Yes, there is a hard medical need here. At the same moment, there seems to be a bit of a disharmonized investment here. Also, what you see is that certain companies are expanding and moving into new therapeutic areas here. If you look at the pipeline compounds and the share in global sales, very classical companies like Roche, historically, you know them from the barbiturates and other antipsychotics out of the 60s and the 70s, are reinvesting here, albeit they have limited market share here. Novartis is moving up, very much known historically from the anti-migraine products, investing here. Then we have also companies like Eisai, which are there. Lundbeck, high market share, but low investment. So people are making up their mind on what to do, and certain companies are really doubling down on this space here. One interesting observation, and that's another industry dynamic here, is small players dominating the CNS pipeline here. It is a bit of a trend, I think. If you look back at pharmaceutical development, say 20, 30 years ago, people were heavily investing in clinical pharmacological endpoints on how to find out, say, a new antipsychotic. I remember was at Organon, we had a whole panel of animal experiments. If you wanted to screen a product for propensity of being a potential product for psychosis treatment, we had the pencil drop test. So rats had to claw on a pencil with 2 paws. And if they could not do that, and you could, but because you gave them the drug, that could be an indication of a psychotropic compound, specifically an antipsychotic. It's very much, say, pharmacology and endpoint oriented. I think with, say, the advent of high throughput screening, people are looking much more at molecular targets, which are serendipitous and have a lot of pleiotropic effects here. And that means also that people start to look at systems here. The kind of dynamics you've seen in other parts of the industry as well is that those companies are developing research, they move into development, then perhaps phase 1, phase 2, and then hand over to big pharma here. And similar dynamics you see happening here as well. So as I said before, the R&D process, the R&D investment of the pharmaceutical industry is increasing significantly. At the same moment, I also mentioned that the success rates are certainly not up. On contrast, are going down. And there are a couple of elements which are driving that. I think we will not dwell today much about biology, because I think the basic understanding of biology, and we have seen the experiment, the presentation on pharmacogenomics, for example, are helping out us very, very big well. But at the same moment, I think there are still issues on recruitment of the right patients in studies, healthcare systems helping to drive and improve early diagnosis, and ultimately also getting the reward for the investment here. So let's move next to recruitment and trial execution here. One of the things what they've seen over the last few years is a dramatic uptake of digital health technology used in clinical studies. And again, I think I have to think back about our early days, Maurice, when we were looking at clinical outcomes assessments. Typically, what you were doing in a clinical trial is have the patient coming back to the office, ask them how they are doing with a paper questionnaire, and then they were sent back home again and had to come back whenever, say, the next meeting and visit was scheduled here. I think the early days already of electronic clinical outcomes assessments helped us to be much more timely. And we all know the diurnal patterns, for example, on anxiety and the impact of that. So these elements are helping us out to get more accurate and more better signal to noise ratio in the studies. And I think it is also with motor function tracking, for example, if you talk about neurological disorders involving exercise here, cognitive tracking, a lot of elements are being used nowadays in clinical trials and should really facilitate, say, a better product improvement here. At the same moment, and again, if you look at a previous slide where you talk about the interventions, they are very much on, say, motor symptoms, neurological symptoms, and being able to track them much better here. What is interesting, if you look at digital therapeutics, the big one is psychiatry. And that's interesting because indeed there are a lot of tools being developed for helping out with cognitive behavioral therapy. And the big question is indeed, say, how much that is being allowed in clinical trials in order to get for your label. At the same moment, it is widely reimbursed. For example, now in Germany, and one of the markets who are running at the forefront of digital therapeutic is Germany here. So I think, again, if you look at, say, the investment people need to make into doing clinical trials and looking at say, the advances in digital technology here, we actually see this also now moving in the forefront here. And actually, one of the very interesting areas is indeed with artificial intelligence here, where people are looking at acoustic signals, for example, voice analysis, to find bioacoustic features correlating with depression here. And that opens up a lot of new possibilities to early diagnose patients and not replace the diagnosis, of course, here, but get them earlier to the doctor and have the doctor indeed make the right kind of diagnosis here. And I think that sits in the second area about helping improving healthcare systems. One of the buzzwords, I think, in the industry of the last couple of years was implementation science. I think when we started the presentations today, we talked a lot about clinical pharmacology. And indeed, based on the insight, for example, Maurice presented here, should we make changes to the DSM-5 here, yes or no, and add in one or two signs and symptoms to make an accurate diagnosis. But at the same moment, I think what Julia also presented here is a beautiful example of saying where healthcare systems perhaps can be improved. I would not call it out, go wrong, but can be improved. And I think really at the other end of the extreme here, there's a lot of cascading of information, decision making to happen on patients make decisions themselves, doctors make decisions for good or bad reasons, pharmacists might intervene here to replace products when people can reconstitute say medication in a different way. And that means also that patient, in essence, are perhaps not always optimally treated. The difference between, say, treatment guidelines and the day-to-day practice are often quite wide. And I think one of the ways is indeed to help at population level using, for example, EMR data, driving algorithms to find out signs and symptoms of patients or diagnoses which ultimately have been, say, wrong diagnosis, wrong medication, and to guide them back to the healthcare provider to reconsider the diagnosis here. And again, I think one of the things of a study we did, when was that, Maurice? I think it was around 2002, where we found out that before actually a diagnosis of menopausal symptoms were being made, and that people were truly with menopause here, they went to the doctor with sleep problems. They went to the doctor with, say, general body pain. And what we also seen, and again, that was based on time series analysis, that it took about 2 to 3 years where patients went through the healthcare system with these complaints until a doctor made the final correct diagnosis that actually this lady was in early menopausal symptoms here. The consequence is also huge because, you know, if a doctor is risk aversive, they will do MRIs, they do all kinds of funny diagnosis, which was just not needed. And I think with current technology, with population, with big data sets, and certainly with data sets like Maurice has, which are, say, more at symptom level, I think there's a lot of promise here with clinical inference engines to help accurately and timely diagnose patients, or at least bring them up for consideration here. And we're doing such studies. Those studies, I will give you just one example of what we have done here in the field of cardiology here. Those studies are revolving around data and data technology, and there's a lot of work to be done still here. This is perhaps a little bit of a pipe dream in certain therapeutic areas, but at the same moment, it is there, the technology is there, the speed of data and data analysis is there, and actually it is much more the willingness of the healthcare system, the healthcare organization to adopt that, and indeed to have regulatory bodies allow for that. And I think this is an area where say, academics who are very much at the root of diagnosis and biology, but also healthcare providers and senior medical officers in the healthcare system should work together to optimize the flow of the patient. This is what I mentioned before. There is an example here, for example, what we did on atrial fibrillation. A little bit of a digression of what we had talked about today in neuroscience here. But atrial fibrillation is a pretty serious condition because it could lead to stroke, and stroke in itself has obviously a lot of mortality and morbidity with it. What we found out is that many patients are just not optimally treated with anticoagulants or not taking their medication. And what was done here is with a healthcare provider organization in the UK, we took 250,000 patients, looking with programs and algorithms to triage the patients in 3 main cohorts. One is not treated with anticoagulant, should be treated. Then there was a second cohort who are suboptimally treated with vitamin K antagonists as an anticoagulant, and the one who are, say, suboptimally treated with a non-vitamin K anticoagulant. And for all those, they were referred to the physician back, and then treatment was optimized here. What we have seen here, and this is a true outcome study instead of drug utilization or with proxy outcomes, is indeed a drop of the number of strokes in this population by 22%. Based on that result, indeed, those studies and algorithms are rolled out wider in the UK. And I think it has taken a lot of effort here and a lot of collaboration amongst people in this healthcare chain to improve here. But I think it is really a promising approach here, which certainly, if you listen to what Julia was mentioning and what Maurice has presented here, is a good point of for innovation in the neuroscience field as well. Now, finally, one of the other challenges we have is if a product is being brought to the market for obvious reasons, and people have a lot of notions and opinions on, say, whether prices are too high, too low, certainly not too low for many people, but if they are optimal, because indeed pharma companies need to get an ROI on the investment here. And as you can imagine, with the still significant number of products which are failing through the pipeline here, I think there are two operational models here. One is indeed increasing the success rate of products going through the pipeline, and we developed a lot about, say, how to optimize clinical trials already. On the other hand, it is also about, say, finding out the optimal price and reimbursement here. And that's where there is a balance between, say, what the clinical endpoints are, and what FDA or EMA is asking for, what payers are asking for. And payers and health technology assessors, that's what the HTA is all about, have really different views often than, say, what the regulatory bodies want here. And essentially, both in the US, through the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, there's an intense pressure on the pharmaceutical industry here to optimize the clinical development, but also make sure that what they call the brand life is optimized here from a price and reimbursement point of view. In Europe, we see something else happening, and I think where for Europe, sorry, for the US, the industry is concerned about, say, the financial impact of the IRA. In Europe, I think the verdict is not out whether the joint clinical assessment, which will come, is good or bad. I will explain a little bit what is happening with joint clinical assessment. The current situation is that in Europe, you have your regulatory submission. After regulatory submission at country level, you need to go for a form of health technology assessment where the authorities will decide what is the innovative level of your product. And once you have done that assessment, then actually your pricing and reimbursement negotiations start. With all the countries, there are wide differences, and I will show 2 or 3 slides on that very topic, wide differences on how they really appreciate health technology assessments and the clinical package you bring to the table, and then also the imperatives, what it means for price and reimbursement is changing there also very much from country to country. The joint clinical assessment essentially brings the health technology assessment to a central level. As of 25, focusing on rare disease and oncology, and later on other therapeutics will follow. Those assessments will all be done central. That means that you would hope, and that's the expectation, that there is less bias and country variation in it. Albeit it becomes a hurdle which is big. The size of the dossier is about 1.5 times a new drug application with the FDA. And it is not a compromise document. Each and every country has their own PICOs, as they call it. They have their own endpoints, their own assessment, their own comparators. And that would mean that either you have to do a lot of, say, clinical trials next to it, or have to do mixed treatment comparisons, so mathematical, statistical analysis on how to compare one product with another. There's a lot of evidence need here, and you need to start very timely to do and to get there. At the same moment, what you would hope is that there is an ultimate one assessment on, say, what is the clinical value of the product versus, say, the different competing products in the market here. And that would mean a more level playing field for the company to then negotiate the optimal pricing. And that could be the bonus of the outcome of here. Yes, there is a lot of investment needed up front, but perhaps ultimately we have a more harmonized clinical assessment of the product, and then only what is left behind is the pricing reimbursement negotiation. So I think it aims to harmonize the HTA methodologies, to establish more predictable outcomes and avoid the duplication, and then ultimately that should lead to better patient access. In that sense, what is expected is that what we call outcomes research, real world evidence, ad hoc studies, different terminology for more or less the same, is increasing and will become even more important. It is impossible to do clinical trials against each and every comparator every country wants to have. So yes, there are, say, synthetic control arms expected. Yes, there will be mixed treatment comparisons being done here. And yes, there will also be more post-launch commitments, which will be done using the real-world evidence coming out of, say, observational studies here. It's definitely a trend of the last few years. That trend will increase. And why that is important is that as I said before, and this is based on some very limited qualitative analysis. I would not call this quantitative at all. But what we have done here, for example, we have a very big repository actually with all past HTA decisions since 2000 for all countries. We looked at say, how did the authorities in all the constituting HTA bodies qualify minimal clinically important differences. on scale-based outcomes in Europe. And we took from 10 major countries in Europe, analyzed over 3,500 documents using natural language processing, looked for clinical outcomes assessments, and then the MCID. You already see that has led to a significant reduction here. And then indeed, we've taken out of those HTAs, 30 HTAs, and looked at 2 to 4 most relevant reports per country here. And what you will see is that countries really handle that differently. So France, Germany, and Netherlands are really questioning on certain MCIDs. If you look at for example, Germany and the Netherlands, they use default threshold to support clinical relevant treatment differences. But France might question, for example, the clinical relevance without pre-specifying thresholds. They're a little bit more free in their interpretation. Other countries like Australia, Canada, and the UK are focusing heavily on the economic outcomes and are looking at alternative responder definitions as part of the sensitivity analysis. So they're looking less at the kind of fixed outcome and just want to play with scenarios here. And Poland and Sweden are not rejected, and the economics are also not so scrutinized here. So what you see here historically is that the clinical outcomes are just quite different amongst the different countries here. And you see similar pattern with a similar kind of analysis we did in Alzheimer's disease, where we looked at 3 main therapy, 4 products coming into the market. The impact for clinical outcome systems were accepted by all bodies, but only positively impact 11 out of 23 HTA decision. Again, a small subset of decisions here, but again, it is showing you that the verdict is not out here. And again, I think the industry hopes that with this joint clinical assessment, there's a little bit more methodological rigor in how this is being used by authorities here. So in summary, I think if you think about how to be very successful as a CNS innovator and looking at, say, what is currently in pipeline, I see a couple of things here happening. I think first of all is really embracing the power of digital. It can help to transform the development, the conversation, and the care delivered through digital tools. I give you some examples of, say, what is happening in the field here, and the wide uptake of the digital technology here. Evidence, I'm preaching to the converted here, is being put front and center. But at the same moment, I think it is important too to realize that what we've seen here is also a fundamental change. The clinical studies are not taken for granted. I think looking back at the early 90s and the early years of health economics, with clinical trials in hand, you made economic predictions on, say, what is the impact of a product in the healthcare system. You negotiated a price and people moved on. I think that are essentially not cost-effective analysis. I think these are cost-efficacy analysis. And what people are asking for is now the effectiveness proof in the healthcare systems. And that is where you can see the advent of managed entry agreements, for example, play a role. There is a lot of push towards a follow-up evidence here. Helping healthcare systems ready. People often don't know about, say, where the burden of illness is sitting, what are the cost of illness, consequences of poor decision-making, wrong decision-making, overdiagnosis of patients, and making sure that you reassure the payer. I mentioned that point earlier. There's a wide perception that the industry is overpricing. I'm not going to judge whether that's right or wrong, but there is a responsibility from the pharmaceutical institute to define the price and make sure that people understand what the value is being brought to the healthcare system here. And in that light, also helping to shape the public debate on that. So at that point, I think I conclude my presentation here.